What's up, fight fans? Thank you as always for passing by the channel. Much appreciated. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. All right, so by the end of 2018, there would have been 15 boxing events that UK broadcast would have asked us UK guys to have paid for, otherwise known as pay-per-view. Not all of the fights were based in the UK, some were abroad, but because they were picked up by UK broadcasters, we've been asked to pay for them to watch them. Now, look, bear in mind, not everyone would have watched and paid for all of these events. It's just not possible. There are 15 on here. We're going to go through all the 15, but you'd have to have been one can short of a six-pack to have paid your hard-earned money to watch all of these. It's just not possible. I probably paid for one, not because I illegally streamed all of them, just because some of them I just wasn't interested in, some of them I didn't watch, some of them I went around to friends' house and watched, and a couple of them I was actually there at the event, so not all of them were illegally streamed. Maybe a couple, but not all of them. This type of number, 15 pay-per-view events per year, is probably going to be the norm going forward. I mean, before it was just Sky Sports. Now, when you think of BT Sports joining up, ITV Box Office joining up as well, so 15 events per year might just be the norm, but it still is an astronomical number. To put it into context, 15 is more than 2013, 2014, 15, 16, and 17 combined. That's how many pay-per-view events we've had this year, which is just incredible. All right, let's go through the pay-per-view events that actually took place in 2018 and ones that will take place in 2018. This is in no particular order either, by the way. All right, so Eubank versus Groves, Groves versus Smith, Joshua Povetkin, Joshua Parker, White Parker, Bellew Hay 2, Smith Holtzgen, Groves versus Cox, Eubank Yildirim, GGG Canelo, Fury Wilder, Frampton Warrington, Chisora White, Bellew Usyk, Usyk Gassiev. Fuck, that's a lot of pay-per-views. And I guess, look, the question will be, what makes a pay-per-view, right? Answers on a postcard. I've changed my mind about this so many times. But what I do remember is staying up for those big American fights, and they felt like pay-per-view events. Two massive stars, world titles on the line. There was casual interest, Madison Square Garden, Vegas. It felt like pay-per-view events. Like, no one's ever going to tell me Pacquiao Cotto wasn't a pay-per-view event. Pacquiao Hatton, Mayweather Pacquiao. So there's some events that feel like pay-per-views and should be pay-per-views. I understand how it works in a sense. You've got to have a pay-per-view to pay these guys the money they want. Some feel like pay-per-views, some don't. And we're going to go through the list and maybe pick out ones that I think just simply aren't, ones that might be, and ones that are kind of borderline. All right, so first one, Eubank versus Groves. Look, I can't lie to you. This fight felt big. It felt big. It almost felt like the final of the World Boxing Super Series. It obviously wasn't the final, but it had so much hype going into it. The Eubanks always bring almost like a carnival show to their events. Groves done his part as well. It was a unification of sorts. Remember, Eubank did have the IBO Super Middleweight title on the line. Groves had the WBA title. It's borderline pay-per-view, and I can kind of understand how ITV put that one on. Groves versus Smith. Look, I get it. It was the final. And I get there were titles on the line. It just didn't feel big. I don't know what it is. Maybe because Groves was injured in the build-up, so it was kind of postponed, and then it happened in Jeddah. It didn't feel big, and it just didn't feel like a pay-per-view event for me. Just for me, it didn't anyway. Joshua Povetkin, I was there for that fight. I was ringside. I was commentating. The undercard was pants. You had a Cody versus Askin. You had David Price versus Kuzman, I believe. I can't remember the guy's name. And a couple other fights. It was awful. The fight, Joshua Povetkin, was okay. And I fully understand now, Joshua is a pay-per-view star. So going forward, Joshua will always be on pay-per-view. It didn't feel like a pay-per-view event, though. Even though it was at Wembley Stadium, it just didn't feel like a pay-per-view event. But I fully understand why it was pay-per-view. Joshua Parker. This one, I think, was pay-per-view. It was a unification. Parker was unbeaten at the time. He had his belt on the line. Joshua had his belts on the line. I can't, for the life of me, though, remember who was on the undercard, but I understand why that was pay-per-view. White versus Parker. Not pay-per-view for me. Parker was coming off a loss. White had just beaten Lucas Brown. I mean, yeah, had a decent undercard. In a sense, we had Chisora versus Takam, but not pay-per-view for me. Bellew versus Hay 2. I guess this is where the argument about pay-per-view comes into consideration. Are we talking about fights that mean something in terms of there's a progression? Are we talking about fights where there's world titles on the line? This kind of had nothing, right? I mean, look, Bellew's obviously gone on to fight Usyk, but this was at heavyweight. This was only because two guys have a big popular fan base, two massive casual fan bases, and that's the reason it was pay-per-view. Again, for me, not pay-per-view. Smith versus Holtzkin. Are you taking the piss? Moving on. Groves versus Cox. Fucking hell. What? This was pay-per-view. Eubank yielded him. World Boxing Super Series took the fucking piss. All those three fights, not pay-per-view, we don't even need to discuss them. GGG versus Canelo. Take my money now. You can have it. You can have it. Whatever it was, you can have it. I mean, and not just because it was a great fight, and it was a great fight, one of my fights of the year, just because it's GGG versus Canelo. Fucking awesome. Fury versus Wilder, pay-per-view. It really is pay-per-view. You've got the WBC champ, never been beaten before. Fury, the lineal champ, never been beaten before. A lot of build-up, a lot of hype going into it. I actually think they've done quite well in the promotion for this as well. They've done like a city tour. Fury's been on different sort of radio shows. Wilder's done the same thing. It's pay-per-view. It really is, people. It is. Frampton versus Warrington. Is this pay-per-view? Probably. I mean, look, Frampton versus Quigg was pay-per-view. And by the way, that done 200,000 buys. Frampton versus Quigg. Warrington's coming off that amazing performance against Lee Selby. And I hand up, I thought Lee Selby was going to beat him. And he didn't. And you got Frampton, who still probably is, I think, pound for pound, number one best fighter in Britain. He's only lost to Leo Santa Cruz, by the way. So I think it is pay-per-view. I don't know how much this pay-per-view is going to cost, but it is pay-per-view, I guess. Chisora versus White, not pay-per-view for me. Not pay-per-view. It just... Chisora's only getting this fight. Obviously, yes, he beat Takam. I get that. Although, he lost every round for me and then just landed that punch at the top of the head that fucked up with Takam's equilibrium. But nonetheless, it was a win. But look, behind that, losses to Pulev, losses to Caballero in the last, 12 to 18 months. White deserves it because White beat Parker, I guess. So White deserves it, but not White Chisora, not for me. Bellew versus Usyk, pay-per-view. I can accept this one. I mean, you're talking about a unification fight for the cruiserweight titles. This is going to be a good fight for a few rounds. I really do believe it. And the final one, Usyk versus Gassiev, yes. World Boxing Super Series final. It felt like an epic fight. It felt massive. It really did. You had two guys who had two belts each. Muhammad Ali trophy. Both of them are unbeaten. Both from completely different styles. Gassiev, the bigger, stronger guy, possibly come forward fighter, and Usyk, the amateur standout, better slick boxer. It was a pay-per-view for me. So, I think I've probably said that 4 or 5 of them, I think I would give pay-per-view money for. A couple of fringe ones and the rest, no. That's where I am with pay-per-view right now. What do you guys make of this? 15 pay-per-view events in 2018. 15. And the funny thing is, there could have been more. GGG versus Canelo, the first one was supposed to go down in May. That would have been pay-per-view, definitely. And Eubank versus DeGale, which has been, I think, canned until 2019, which was supposed to take place in December. That would probably have been pay-per-view as well. So we could be sitting here with 17, which is, again, unbelievable, but it is a sign of the times. Unless a channel like DAZN comes in, where everyone just pays a monthly subscription and we get all these pay-per-views for free, this will be the norm going forward. But you do pick and choose, right? You do pick and choose. Again, on this list, no one, unless maybe you're a boxing journalist, even so, like, I cover boxing, I ain't paying for all this shit. Absolutely not. But yeah, what do you guys think? Leave your comments below. Of the ones I've listed, which ones would you say are guaranteed pay-per-view? And I know this is such a vague question, but what makes pay-per-view nowadays compared to what it was 10 years ago? Like I mentioned, the Miguel Cotto versus Pacquiao, Cotto Margarito, they just felt like big fights, didn't they? We've got Groves versus Cox here. Smith Holtzkin. Smith versus a late replacement kickboxer. Pay-per-view. Fuck me.